Maya Thompson stared at the white walls of Riverdale Mental Health Center's waiting room, her hands trembling as she filled out the admission forms. The fluorescent lights above made her head pound even more than it already was. Next to her, her roommate Sarah Martinez sat quietly, occasionally squeezing Maya's shoulder for support. It hadn't been an easy decision to come here. Just 3 hours ago, Maya had been curled up in a corner of their dorm room, struggling to breathe through the worst anxiety attack she ever experienced. Finals week had pushed her over the edge, but if she was honest with herself, the signs had been there for months. The sleepless nights, lost appetite, and constant feeling of dread that followed her everywhere. "You're doing the right thing," Sarah whispered, helping Maya steady the pen when her hand shook too much to write. "Getting help isn't weakness." Maya nodded, though her throat felt too tight to respond. At 19, she was the first person in her family to attend college. The pressure to succeed, to prove everyone wrong who said she couldn't make it, had been crushing her slowly. Now, sitting in this sterile waiting room at 11 p.m., she felt both relief and terror. The intake nurse, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, called Maya's name. As Maya stood up, Sarah gave her a quick hug. "I'll come visit as soon as they allow it," her roommate promised. "Just focus on getting better." Maya followed the nurse through heavy double doors, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest. It contained the few personal items she'd been told she could bring: 3 changes of clothes, basic toiletries, and a photo of her family. The nurse led her to a small office where a younger woman sat behind a computer. "I'm Nancy, one of the intake coordinators," the younger woman said, taking Maya's paperwork. She began typing information into the computer, her expression neutral until she reached Maya's insurance details. Something flickered across her face, so quick Maya almost missed it. "State-funded insurance?" Nancy asked, her tone slightly different than before. "Yes," Maya answered quietly. "I'm on scholarship at Berkeley State." Nancy continued typing, but Maya noticed how her shoulders had tensed slightly. "And your emergency contact is Sarah Martinez? Not family?" "My family lives in Georgia," Maya explained, her voice getting smaller. "Sarah's my roommate. She's the closest person here." The typing continued, each click of the keyboard feeling louder than the last. When Nancy reached the medical history section, her eyebrows rose. "No prior mental health treatment?" "No," Maya said, fighting the urge to apologize, though she wasn't sure for what. "This is my first time." Nancy finished the intake forms and pressed a button on her desk. A few minutes later, another nurse appeared, Sarah Whitmore, according to her name tag. She was tall, with blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll take it from here," Nurse Whitmore said to Nancy, before turning to Maya. "Let's get you settled in Unit B." As they walked down the corridor, Maya noticed how Nurse Whitmore kept a noticeable distance between them, unlike how she'd seen her walking arm in arm with an elderly white patient earlier. The nurse's voice was professionally cold as she explained the unit rules: scheduled meal times, medication times, therapy sessions, and visiting hours. They stopped at a small room with 2 beds. One was empty, the other had a sleeping figure under the covers. "This will be your room," Nurse Whitmore said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your roommate is already asleep. Try not to disturb her." Maya placed her backpack on the empty bed, her movements careful and quiet. When she turned around, Nurse Whitmore was already at the door. "Breakfast is at 7 a.m. sharp," she said. "Don't be late. We run a tight schedule here." Her emphasis on tight schedule carried an undertone that made Maya's anxiety spike again. After the nurse left, Maya sat on her bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mental health unit. Distant footsteps, the soft whir of air conditioning, occasional murmurs from the nurse's station. She changed into her pajamas in the dark, trying not to wake her roommate. As she lay down, Maya whispered a quiet prayer, something she hadn't done since leaving home. "Please let this be the right decision," she breathed into her pillow, pulling the thin hospital blanket up to her chin. "Please let me find help here." She didn't know then that her prayer would be answered, but not in the way she expected. She couldn't have known that this night, this decision to seek help, would set in motion events that would expose deep-rooted problems within the hospital's walls. For now, she was just a scared teenager in an unfamiliar place, hoping tomorrow would be better than today. Maya woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of squeaking wheels in the hallway. Her roommate's bed was already empty, neatly made. She reached for her small notebook, the only item besides the family photo that she'd hidden in her pillowcase last night, not trusting to leave it in her backpack. The morning routine started with a shower. Maya stood in line with other patients, holding her toiletries close. When it was her turn, Nurse Whitmore handed her a towel, dropping it into her hands instead of passing it normally like she had done with others. 10 minutes only, the nurse said sharply. Some people need extra time to get clean, but we can't waste water here. Maya's cheeks burned at the comment, but she kept quiet. In the shower, she quickly washed her braids, conscious of the time. 8 minutes later, there was a loud bang on the door. Time's up. Nurse Whitmore's voice called out, even though Maya could hear other patients getting 15 to 20 minutes. During breakfast in the common room, Maya sat alone at first, picking at her cold oatmeal. A friendly-looking older woman with gray hair joined her table. "I'm Patricia," the woman said warmly. "First night's always the hardest, honey." Maya managed a small smile. "I'm Maya. Does it get easier?" "Usually," Patricia nodded, then lowered her voice. "Just stay clear of Nurse Whitmore if you can. Some of us have noticed she can be difficult." Before Maya could respond, Nurse Whitmore appeared behind them. "Thompson, you missed morning medication line while chatting. Come with me now." Maya hadn't missed anything. Medication time wasn't for another 15 minutes. But she got up quietly, writing the incident in her notebook later. Day 1. False accusation about meds. Real time, 8:15 a.m. Called at 8:00 a.m. The day continued with more subtle incidents. During group therapy, Dr. Roberts asked everyone to share their reasons for seeking help. When Maya mentioned her anxiety and academic pressure, Nurse Whitmore, who was sitting in on the session, muttered something that sounded like playing the victim. Maya wrote that down too. At lunch, Maya's food tray came last, and her sandwich had no filling, just dry bread. When she politely mentioned this to Nurse Whitmore, the response was cold. "If you're really hungry, you'll eat what you're given. We're not running a restaurant." The afternoon got worse. Maya's scheduled call with Sarah, her roommate, was mysteriously forgotten until visiting hours were almost over. When she finally got phone access, she had only 5 minutes instead of the standard 15. "Something feels wrong here," Maya whispered to Sarah during their brief call. The nurse, she. "Time's up." Nurse Whitmore interrupted, reaching for the phone. That evening, during medication time, Maya noticed something concerning. While other patients received their medications in small paper cups, Nurse Whitmore insisted on dropping Maya's pills directly into her hand, making her fumble to catch them. "Oops," Nurse Whitmore said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Better be more careful. If you drop them, we'll have to report it as a refusal." Maya caught the pills, but her hands were shaking. Later, in her room, she added more notes to her growing list. Day 1 evening. Short shower time, 8 mins versus others 15 to 20. Breakfast incident. Group therapy comment. Empty sandwich. Cut foam time. Medication handling. Her new roommate, Lisa, watched her writing from across the room. "You should be careful with that," she warned quietly. "Nurse Whitmore doesn't like patients keeping records." "I have to," Maya replied softly. "Something isn't right here, and I need proof." "Just watch your back," Lisa said, rolling over to face the wall. "Last week, another girl complained about her. Suddenly, her 72-hour hold turned into a 2-week stay because she was showing paranoid tendencies." Maya's hand tightened around her pen, but she kept writing. If she was going to be stuck here, she needed to document everything. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "When the world isn't fair, baby girl, you better have your facts straight." She tucked the notebook back into her pillowcase as footsteps approached. Nurse Whitmore's distinctive walk, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Maya quickly pretended to be asleep, but she could feel the nurse lingering in the doorway, watching. The feeling followed her into an uneasy sleep, where she dreamed of endless white hallways with no escape. 3 days into her stay at Riverdale Mental Health Center, Maya noticed the discrimination becoming more obvious. She sat on her bed that morning, carefully braiding her hair before breakfast, when Nurse Whitmore walked in unannounced. "We've had complaints about the smell of your hair products," Nurse Whitmore announced loudly, making sure other patients in the hallway could hear. "You'll need to wash your hair again." Maya's hands froze mid-braid. "I used the hospital shampoo yesterday," she said quietly, "the same one everyone uses." "Don't talk back," Nurse Whitmore snapped. "And those braids, they're probably hiding contraband. We'll need to check them." Patricia, who was passing by, stopped at the door. "That's ridiculous, Sarah," she said to Nurse Whitmore. "I've been here 2 weeks and nobody's ever had their braids checked." The nurse turned sharply. "This isn't your concern, Patricia. Back to your room, or I'll note down that you're being disruptive." Maya's hands trembled as she undid her braids while Nurse Whitmore watched. No contraband was found, of course, but the humiliation burned in Maya's chest. Later, she wrote in her notebook, Day 3. Forced to undo braids. Witness, Patricia. Time, 7:45 a.m. During morning group therapy, things got worse. When Maya tried to share her progress with anxiety management, Nurse Whitmore, who wasn't even supposed to be in the session, interrupted. "Are you sure you're not exaggerating your symptoms?" she asked. "Some people think anxiety is a good excuse for special treatment." Dr. Roberts, the therapist, frowned. "Nurse Whitmore, please let Maya speak." But the damage was done. Maya fell silent, her throat tight with unshed tears. Other patients shifted uncomfortably in their seats, looking away. At lunch, Maya discovered her medication chart had mysterious new notes. "Patient showed aggressive behavior during morning check," it claimed. "Resisted routine contraband search." "This isn't true," Maya told the day shift doctor during rounds. "I never." "We'd have to trust our nursing staff's observations," the doctor cut her off, barely looking up from the chart. "Nurse Whitmore is one of our most experienced nurses." That afternoon, during visiting hours, Sarah finally came. Maya had been counting the minutes, desperate to see a friendly face. But as soon as her roommate arrived, Nurse Whitmore appeared. "Thompson," she called out. "Time for your extra therapy session." Maya looked up, confused. "I don't have any extra sessions scheduled." "It's been added to your treatment plan due to your behavioral issues." Nurse Whitmore smiled coldly. "We can't have visitors interfering with treatment." Sarah stood up, her face showing concern. "I drove 2 hours to get here during approved visiting hours." "Hospital policy," Nurse Whitmore said firmly. "Treatment comes first." Maya watched helplessly as Sarah was escorted out. Through the window, she saw her friend arguing with the front desk, probably trying to understand why she was being turned away. But eventually, Sarah had to leave. That evening, Maya developed a headache. When she asked for Tylenol during medication rounds, Nurse Whitmore made her wait at the nurse's station for over an hour. "Are you sure it's real pain?" the nurse asked loudly. "Some people have different pain tolerances. Maybe you're just seeking attention." Other nurses at the station looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Maya noticed one of them, a younger nurse named Jessica, writing something in her own notebook when Nurse Whitmore wasn't looking. Back in her room, Lisa helped Maya document everything. "Jessica's been keeping her own records," Lisa whispered. "She doesn't agree with what's happening, but she's new and scared of losing her job." Maya added more entries to her notebook. Day 3 evening. Forced hair check. False behavioral notes. Blocked visitor during approved hours. Denied pain medication. Witness, Nurse Jessica. As she wrote, Maya's hands shook less than before. The fear was still there, but something else was growing stronger. Determination. She thought about other patients who might face the same treatment. About Sarah, who drove 2 hours only to be turned away. About Jessica, secretly documenting things too. "We need to do something," Lisa said softly, watching Maya write. "This isn't right." "I know," Maya replied, closing her notebook carefully. "But we need more proof. And we need to be smart about it." That night, as Maya lay in bed, she heard Nurse Whitmore and another nurse talking in the hallway. "That Thompson girl is trouble," Whitmore was saying. "Always writing in that notebook of hers. We might need to extend her stay for further evaluation." Maya clutched her notebook tighter under her pillow, her heart racing. She knew then that things would get worse before they got better. But she also knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. not just for herself, but for everyone else who might come after her. A week into Maya's stay at Riverdale, she finally gathered the courage to file a formal complaint. She sat in the patient advocate's office, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as she detailed every incident from her notebook. The advocate, Mr. Peterson, typed everything into his computer with a concerned expression. "These are serious allegations," he said, printing out the complaint form. "I'll make sure this reaches administration immediately." But by that evening, Maya realized her complaint had only made things worse. Nurse Whitmore stormed into her room during dinner time, her face flushed with anger. "So, you think filing complaints will help?" she hissed, checking first to make sure no one was in the hallway. "Let's see how you like having your privileges revoked for safety concerns." The next morning, Maya found her status changed to high-risk patient on the ward board. This meant no phone calls, no visitors, and constant monitoring. Her notebook disappeared during room check, though Maya had hidden her original one deeper in her mattress. The one they took was a decoy. "Your behavior suggests paranoid tendencies," Nurse Whitmore announced during morning rounds, speaking to the doctor while Maya sat silently. "She's been writing obsessively, making accusations against staff. Classic signs of persecution delusions." The doctor nodded without really looking at Maya. "We'll extend her stay for observation. Better safe than sorry." Maya felt her world shrinking. Even Patricia and Lisa were warned to keep their distance from her. She watched helplessly as Nurse Whitmore wrote false incident reports in her chart. Patient showed aggression during medication time. Found patient writing suspicious notes about staff. Patient appears to be influencing other patients with paranoid ideas. That afternoon, everything reached a breaking point. Maya received her new medication, a small blue pill she'd never seen before. When she asked what it was, Nurse Whitmore smiled coldly. "Just something to help with your paranoia," she said. "Take it." Maya swallowed the pill, having learned that refusing medication would only make things worse. Within an hour, her skin began to itch. Red patches appeared on her arms, and her tongue felt swollen. "Nurse," Maya called out, her voice becoming hoarse. "Something's wrong." Nurse Whitmore glanced at her from the nurse's station. "Stop seeking attention. Return to your room." But Maya could feel her throat tightening. She stumbled to the nurse's station, holding onto the wall for support. Her face felt hot and puffy. "I can't breathe," she wheezed. Jessica, the young nurse, jumped up in alarm. "She's having an allergic reaction. We need epinephrine." "She's faking it," Nurse Whitmore declared, stepping in front of the medication cabinet. "Go back to your room, Thompson. This attention-seeking behavior needs to stop." Maya's vision began to blur. Behind her, she heard Patricia yelling for help. Lisa ran to get Dr. Roberts from his office. Maya slid down the wall, her breathing becoming more labored. Finally, Dr. Roberts arrived, took one look at Maya, and rushed to the medication cabinet. "Get out of the way," he ordered Nurse Whitmore. "She's in anaphylactic shock." The next few minutes were chaos. The emergency response team arrived. Maya felt the sharp sting of an EpiPen in her thigh. Oxygen was placed over her face. Through her fading consciousness, she heard Dr. Roberts shouting. "Why wasn't this handled immediately? She has a documented sulfa allergy in her chart. Who approved this medication change?" Maya was stabilized, but the incident shook the entire ward. Jessica stayed by her side in the recovery room, checking her vitals every 15 minutes. When they were alone, the young nurse leaned close. "I've been documenting everything too," she whispered. "What happened today? It could have killed you. This has to stop." Later that night, as Maya lay in the recovery room, she heard the night shift custodian, Janet, cleaning nearby. The older woman paused at Maya's door. "I'm so sorry about today," Janet said softly. "I've seen how she treats you. Maybe you need to call someone who can help. Someone outside." Maya looked at Janet, understanding slowly dawning. The custodian glanced around carefully, then slipped something under Maya's pillow. "I work tomorrow night too," Janet whispered. "During your shower time, nobody checks the old storage room at the end of Hall B." Under her pillow, Maya felt the shape of a small cell phone. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. Tomorrow, during her shower time, she would make the most important call of her life. The next evening couldn't come fast enough. Maya spent the day pretending to be weaker than she actually was after her allergic reaction, knowing it would make her upcoming plan easier. She kept the small phone hidden in her pillowcase, her heart racing every time someone entered her room. Janet, the night custodian, had been working at Riverdale Mental Health Center for 15 years. She'd seen many things during her quiet night shifts, but something about Maya's situation struck a deeper chord. As she mopped the halls that evening, she remembered her own daughter, who had faced similar discrimination at another hospital years ago. At 8:30 p.m., Janet started her usual cleaning routine, strategically beginning with the old storage room at the end of Hall B. She organized her cleaning supplies, but also carefully propped the door in a way that looked closed while leaving it slightly open. The room's location was perfect, far enough from the nurse's station to be private, but not so isolated as to raise suspicion. "Shower time, Thompson," Nurse Whitmore announced at 8:45 p.m., her voice dripping with the usual contempt. "Try not to have another medical emergency today." Maya gathered her towel and toiletries, her movements deliberately slow and shaky. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly, playing the role of a defeated patient. As Maya walked down the hallway, she caught Janet's eye briefly. The custodian was mopping near the storage room, humming softly to herself. She gave Maya the slightest of nods. 10 minutes, Nurse Whitmore called after her. Not a second more. Maya turned toward the bathroom but quickly slipped into the storage room when no one was looking. Janet continued mopping, positioning her cart to partially block the view from the nurse's station. Inside the dim room, Maya's hands trembled as she dialed 911. 1 ring. 2 rings. Her heart pounded so hard she worried someone might hear it. 911. "What's your emergency?" Maya's voice came out in a whisper. "My name is Maya Thompson. I'm a patient at Riverdale Mental Health Center, and I need help." She spoke quickly but clearly, knowing her time was limited. "I'm being discriminated against and experiencing medical abuse from a nurse named Sarah Whitmore." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "Are you in immediate danger?" "Yesterday I almost died from an allergic reaction because she denied me medical care," Maya explained, her voice shaking. "She's falsifying my medical records to keep me here longer. I have everything documented. Please, you have to help me." As Maya provided more details, Janet kept watch outside, her mop moving in steady rhythms. She saw Lisa walking by and gave her a meaningful look. Understanding immediately, Lisa started a conversation with another patient near the nurse's station, creating a distraction. "Police and investigators will be dispatched," the dispatcher assured Maya. "Can you safely stay on the line?" "No," Maya whispered. "I only have a few minutes before they check my shower time, but please hurry, and be careful. She's very good at covering things up." After providing the ward number and her patient ID, Maya ended the call. She deleted the number from the call log with trembling fingers, then slipped the phone back to Janet through the barely opened door. Just in time, footsteps approached. Maya quickly moved to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and stepped in fully clothed. She needed the water as proof she'd been showering. 30 seconds later, Nurse Whitmore's sharp knock came at the door. "Time's up, Thompson." "But it hasn't been 10 minutes. Maya called back, her heart still racing from the call. "Are you arguing with me?" The nurse's voice turned dangerous. "No, ma'am. Coming out now." As Maya walked back to her room, dripping wet and still in her clothes, she passed Janet again. The custodian was now cleaning the windows, the phone safely hidden away in her uniform pocket. "You okay, honey?" Janet asked softly, loud enough for anyone to hear. "You're soaking wet." "My shower got cut short," Maya replied, playing along. "I didn't have time to change." That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the 911 call, wondering if help would really come. Janet's shift ended at midnight, and Maya watched through her door as the custodian left, carrying both her quiet courage and the secret phone with her. "Thank you," Maya mouthed silently when Janet passed by. The older woman gave her a small smile. "Stay strong, baby girl," she whispered. "The truth always finds its way out." The next morning started like any other at Riverdale Mental Health Center, until 3 police cars and an unmarked vehicle pulled into the parking lot at 9 a.m. Maya watched from the common room window as 4 officers and 2 people in business suits walked toward the main entrance. Nurse Whitmore was at the nurse's station, organizing morning medications, when the group entered the ward. Her usual confident smile faltered as one of the business-suited women approached her. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen from the County Police Department," the woman announced, showing her badge. "And this is Mr. Rodriguez from the State Health Department. We're here to investigate serious allegations of patient abuse." The ward fell silent. Even the TV in the common room seemed to grow quieter. Maya sat very still, her heart pounding as she watched from across the room. "This is ridiculous," Nurse Whitmore said, her voice higher than usual. "We run a professional facility here. Who made these accusations?" "That's confidential," Mr. Rodriguez replied firmly. "We'll need access to all patient records, security footage, and staff documentation immediately." The hospital administrator, Dr. Phillips, rushed in looking flustered. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "No," Detective Chen said clearly. "We'll conduct our investigation here, where the incidents occurred. First, we need to speak with each patient privately." Maya noticed how Nurse Whitmore's hands shook as she tried to maintain her composure. "Many of our patients are not in a mental state to be questioned," she protested. "Especially Maya Thompson. She's been experiencing paranoid delusions." "Interesting that you specifically mention Ms. Thompson," Detective Chen noted, writing something in her notebook. "We haven't mentioned any names yet." The color drained from Nurse Whitmore's face. The investigation moved quickly. Police officers stationed themselves at every exit. 2 more investigators arrived with computer specialists who began downloading security footage. Patients were interviewed one by one in the quiet room. When it was Maya's turn, she brought out her hidden notebook. "I documented everything," she said, handing it to Detective Chen. "Dates, times, witnesses." The notebook they confiscated was a decoy. Detective Chen read through the entries carefully. "This is very detailed, Maya, but we'll need witnesses to confirm these incidents." As if on cue, Jessica, the young nurse, stepped into the room. "I have records too," she said quietly, pulling out her own notebook. "I've been documenting Nurse Whitmore's behavior for weeks. I was just afraid to come forward." More staff members began to speak up. The kitchen worker who witnessed Maya's empty lunch trays. The maintenance man who heard Nurse Whitmore's racist comments. Even Dr. Roberts came forward with his concerns about the allergic reaction incident. But the strongest evidence came from an unexpected source. Patricia, the older patient who had tried to defend Maya, turned out to be a retired nurse herself. She had written detailed letters to her family about the discrimination she witnessed, complete with dates and times. "I knew someone would need proof someday," Patricia explained during her interview. "I've seen this kind of discrimination before in my 40 years of nursing." By afternoon, the investigators discovered more disturbing evidence. Security footage showed Nurse Whitmore tampering with Maya's food tray. Computer records revealed unauthorized changes to Maya's medical charts. The missing complaint forms were found hidden in Nurse Whitmore's desk drawer. The most damning evidence came from Janet, the night custodian. She had been secretly recording audio on her phone during her shifts, capturing Nurse Whitmore's verbal abuse and threats. "I knew that child needed someone to believe her," Janet told the investigators, her voice firm. "Sometimes being silent is the same as being guilty." Maya watched from her room as Nurse Whitmore was escorted off the ward by police officers. The nurse's face was a mask of anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she passed Maya's door. "No one will believe a mentally ill girl over a respected nurse." Detective Chen stepped between them. "Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, we have more than enough evidence. You should save your statements for court." That evening, the ward felt different. Other nurses smiled at Maya openly now. Patients gathered in the common room, sharing stories they'd been afraid to tell before. The heavy atmosphere of fear had lifted. Dr. Phillips came to Maya's room looking grave. "We owe you an apology," he said, "and a debt of gratitude. Your courage has exposed problems we need to address." Maya nodded, too emotional to speak. On her bed lay a new set of forms, her discharge papers. She could finally go home, knowing she had not just survived, but had made a difference. 2 months after the investigation began, Maya sat in a crowded courthouse, wearing a navy blue blazer borrowed from Sarah. The preliminary hearing for the case against nurse Sarah Whitmore was about to begin, and the room was packed with familiar faces from Riverdale Mental Health Center. Janet, the night custodian, sat directly behind Maya, her work uniform replaced by a simple black dress. Patricia was there too, along with Lisa, Jessica, and several other former patients who had come forward after Maya's case made local headlines. The state versus Sarah Whitmore, the court clerk announced. Multiple charges of medical negligence, patient abuse, and falsification of medical records. Maya watched as Nurse Whitmore entered with her lawyer. The nurse's usual confident stride was gone, replaced by nervous glances around the courtroom. She looked smaller somehow, without her white uniform and authority. The district attorney, Ms. Martinez, stood up. Your Honor, we have extensive evidence of systematic discrimination and medical abuse at Riverdale Mental Health Center, specifically targeting minority patients. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Jessica presented her detailed notes about medication mistakes that only seemed to happen to certain patients. The hospital's computer expert testified about the suspicious pattern of altered medical records. When it was Maya's turn, she walked to the witness stand with shaking legs but a steady voice. She held her worn notebook, its pages now copied and entered as evidence. Can you tell us what happened on April 15th? Ms. Martinez asked. Maya described the allergic reaction in detail, the ignored symptoms, Nurse Whitmore blocking access to medication, the near-fatal delay in treatment. In the gallery, several people wiped tears from their eyes. And why did you start documenting these incidents? The DA continued. Because I knew nobody would believe me otherwise, Maya answered clearly. When you're a patient in a mental hospital, people assume everything you say is because of your illness. I needed proof. During cross-examination, Whitmore's lawyer tried to discredit Maya's testimony. Isn't it true that you were admitted for anxiety and paranoid tendencies? Objection. Ms. Martinez stood up. The defense is attempting to use the victim's mental health condition to discredit her documented evidence. Sustained, the judge ruled firmly. The strongest testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Phillips, a hospital administrator, had conducted an internal investigation that revealed a disturbing pattern going back years. We found at least 20 similar cases, he testified, looking ashamed. All involving minority patients, all swept under the rug. Our system failed these patients, and I take full responsibility for not seeing it sooner. During a court recess, Maya sat in the hallway with Janet and Patricia. I never thought this would get so big, she whispered. Sometimes it takes one brave person to break the silence, Janet said, squeezing her hand. You didn't just help yourself, you helped everyone who might have come after you. The hearing lasted 3 days. In the end, the judge's decision was clear. Nurse Whitmore would face criminal charges, and the case would go to trial. More importantly, the judge ordered a complete review of Riverdale's policies and procedures. This case reveals systemic problems that go beyond one individual, the judge declared. The entire mental health care system needs examination and reform. After the hearing, reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Maya stood with her supporters as Ms. Martinez made a statement. Today marks the beginning of real change, the DA announced. The Department of Health is implementing new oversight procedures for all mental health facilities in the state. Mandatory bias training, anonymous reporting systems, and regular patient advocacy reviews will be required. Dr. Phillips stepped forward next. Riverdale is establishing a patient rights board, he announced. And we've invited Maya Thompson to serve as our first advisory member, if she's willing. Maya hadn't expected this. She looked at Janet, who nodded encouragingly. Your voice is needed, Patricia whispered. You can make sure this never happens to anyone else. Later that evening, Maya sat in her dorm room, looking at news coverage of the case on her laptop. Her phone kept buzzing with messages of support from other former patients who had seen the story. Sarah, her roommate, brought her a cup of tea. How does it feel to be a change maker? Maya touched her notebook, its pages now copied into official court records. It feels like the beginning, she said quietly. There's so much more work to do. On her desk lay an invitation to speak at next month's Mental Health Advocacy Conference. The theme was breaking the silence, patient rights and medical justice. Maya picked up a pen and began to write her speech, ready to turn her experience into something bigger than herself. 6 months after the courthouse hearing, Maya stood at a podium in front of 300 people at the state mental health conference. The audience included doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and most importantly, patients and their families. My story began with a notebook and a desperate call for help. Maya started, her voice steady despite her nerves. But it became something much bigger, a call for change that echoed through our entire healthcare system. In the front row, Janet sat proudly in a new blazer, no longer wearing a custodian's uniform. After the trial, she had been promoted to patient rights coordinator at Riverdale, a new position created specifically to monitor patient treatment and handle complaints. Patricia was there too, now serving as a patient advocate consultant for several hospitals. Her 40 years of nursing experience have proven invaluable in developing new training programs for medical staff. Today, I'm happy to announce that 28 mental health facilities across our state have adopted the Thompson Protocol, Maya continued, gesturing to the screen behind her. This includes mandatory body cameras for staff, anonymous reporting systems, and diverse patient advocacy boards. The protocol, named after Maya despite her initial protests, had become a model for mental health facilities nationwide. It required every facility to have patient advocates from different backgrounds, regular cultural sensitivity training, and strict oversight of patient treatment. After her speech, Maya participated in a panel discussion with Dr. Phillips and other healthcare leaders. The former hospital administrator had become one of her strongest allies in pushing for reform. The changes Ms. Thompson helped implement at Riverdale have actually improved our treatment success rates, Dr. Phillips reported. When patients feel safe and respected, they're more likely to engage in their treatment. During the lunch break, a young black teenage girl approached Maya's table shyly. "I read about your story in the newspaper," she said quietly. "I'm starting therapy next week, and I was scared, but knowing there are people like you fighting for us, it helps." Maya hugged the girl, remembering her own fears 6 months ago. "You have rights," she told her firmly. "And now there are people and systems in place to protect those rights." Later that afternoon, Maya led a workshop for hospital staff about recognizing and preventing discrimination. Jessica, now head nurse at Riverdale's Youth Wing, helped demonstrate the new reporting systems they had developed. "Each patient receives this tablet during admission," Jessica explained, holding up a device. "They can document their experiences, report concerns, and even rate their daily interactions with staff. All data is monitored by an independent patient advocacy team." As for Nurse Whitmore, she had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for medical negligence and abuse of power. More importantly, she would never work in healthcare again. The case had set a legal precedent for holding medical professionals accountable for discriminatory practices. After the conference, Maya returned to Berkeley State, where she was now a junior, majoring in healthcare administration with a minor in civil rights law. Her own experiences had shaped her career goals. She wanted to change the system from within. That evening, she had dinner with Janet, Patricia, and Sarah at a small restaurant near campus. They met monthly to catch up and discuss ongoing reforms in the mental health care system. "Remember that scared girl with the hidden notebook?" Janet asked, smiling at Maya. "Look at you now, teaching doctors and changing laws." "I couldn't have done it without you," Maya replied, thinking of that small cell phone slipped under her pillow months ago, "without any of you." Sarah checked her phone and grinned. "Hey, guess what? The Thompson Protocol just got approved in another state. That makes 5 now." Maya felt tears in her eyes as Patricia raised her glass in a toast. "To courage," the older woman said, "and to change." Later that night, Maya sat at her desk, looking at her old notebook. Its pages were worn now, handled by lawyers, judges, and hospital administrators, but more importantly, its contents had sparked a movement. She opened her laptop and began typing. "A Guide to Patient Rights and Self-Advocacy." It would be her first book, but not her last. There were still many stories to tell, many changes to make. On her wall hung a framed photo from the hospital, not from her time as a patient, but from last week's staff training. In it, she stood with a diverse group of patient advocates, all wearing badges that read "Every Patient Matters." Maya touched the frame gently, remembering the scared teenager who'd walked into Riverdale months ago. That girl had needed someone to believe her. Now, she had become that someone for others. Her phone buzzed with a text from a new patient at Riverdale. "Thank you for making this place safe for people like me." Maya smiled, typing back, "Keep speaking up. Your voice matters."